Next topic. Doc, I want to ask you, we're going to talk a little bit about winter running tips. And before we bring on our expert guest, you do any winter running?
Yeah, I got to admit, Steve, I think there are two groups of people in life, runners and non-runners,
Right.
and you're either in one camp or the other, and I'm definitively in the non-runner camp. I exercise because it keeps me healthy. I use a spin bike or elliptical. I'm just not a big running fanatic.
I'm not either. I'll do the cardio in the gym, 30 to 40 minutes, 3-4 times a week. But outside, I'd like to. You know, my wife runs a little bit, and we have a dog, and take the dog running. It looks like fun, but especially in the winter, I just can't do it in the winter.
It's tough to motivate, and I think for the group that does run, it's as much about the mental side as it is the physical side. I mean, it really is part of who they are and the way that they decompress and kind of let the day run away from them. I think they use it as much for mental relaxation as they do physical. That's been my impression.
We'll see people in the suburbs on Lakeshore Drive, right? I mean, no matter the temperature, they will run. Let's bring on our next guest. Karen Shanahan is a facility manager at Athletico. Athletico does a marvelous job. We know that, big part of our show. And right now, Karen is at Lake in the Hills. And Karen, thanks so much for joining us. You're a physical therapist, athletic trainer, been with Athletico for 15 years. My first question about winter running, when should you avoid running outside in the winter?
First of all, I want to just say thank you for having me on the show. And when to avoid running outside, you want to make sure that if the wind chill is below zero, you should definitely avoid it. Or if the weathermen on the Weather Channel say avoid outdoor activities, that's a good tip. You also want to make sure that if it's really windy out, even with warmer temperatures, that you're careful about how much time you're spending outside to avoid any type of cold injuries such as frostbite or hypothermia.
Yeah, I think those are great points, Karen. You know, I think we sometimes underestimate how quickly skin exposed to very cold temperatures can undergo a problem or frostbite or something like that. Can you give our listeners some tips about dressing for the cold? It's really hard because you start off, it's cold out, you want to feel warm, but very quickly as your body heats up, you start reaching a higher body temperature from the physical exertion, you start shedding layers. So is that really your suggestion? Is it a layered approach?
Definitely layers are helpful. You actually want to dress anywhere between 10 to 20 degrees warmer. So if, the temperature is 30 degrees out, you want to dress as if it's 50 degrees. Once you start going and once you start your run, you're going to start to sweat. And if you're overdressed, you'll overheat. So a layered approach can help out if you're really cold at the beginning, that you can kind of either, unzip a jacket or tie a shirt around your waist to avoid that overheating. And it's important that first layer you're wearing is kind of more of a wicking layer or a wool layer to keep that sweat off and helps to maintain the core body temperature without getting too chilled in there. If it's really rainy or snowy or very windy out, like a wind-breaking layer on the top can also help to maintain that temperature without getting too overheated.
And wear a hat, right?
Yes, definitely want to wear a hat to help avoid that heat loss. And if you're wearing gloves, make sure they're wicking gloves because you don't want to have too much sweat build up on your hands that can contribute to a frostbite injury.
Yeah, the way they're making apparel these days, it's marvelous, isn't it?
I
mean, all this wicking stuff and everything.
Now available. You can have very thin or lightweight materials that still provide either coverage or temperature control, or as Karen said, wicking of the fluid away as you start to sweat when you're exerting yourself. So it's amazing.
Again, we're visiting with Karen Shanahan, facility manager, athletic trainer, physical therapist for Athletico, stationed in the Lake in the Hills area. We're talking about some winter running tips. How about warming up, Karen, prior to running in the cold? What do you suggest for, you just can't go out there and just start, right?
Correct. You definitely want to make sure you warm up your body temperature. It's even more important when the temperatures are pretty cold and the wind chill is a little bit lower. So moving around inside before you even go outside is helpful. And you want to move around enough to get your blood flowing, but not to really break a big sweat. If you're breaking a sweat before you go outside, then you're going to become chilled more easily. Typically, once you're outside, you want to try and walk for a few minutes just to get acclimatized to that colder weather. And sometimes it can take 10 to 15 minutes of your run until you kind of get into a groove and your core temperature is warmed up enough that you feel like you can go at a typical pace for yourself.
That's great stuff, Karen. in addition to being cold outside, this is obviously cold and flu season. I've got a little bit of one right now. But one of the things that we have to deal with in team coverage is when a patient is or when a player is ill, is when is it safe for them to go out and participate in an athletic activity. And that's not unlike a runner deciding if, even though they have an illness, are they safe to go out and run. So one of the things we think about is fever is probably the biggest predictor. When you have a fever, that's probably the time you need to stay inside and avoid running. It leads to dehydration and other changes in your metabolism that can really cause some safety concerns. And so that's really my go-to in terms of determining if somebody's able to play or able to participate in a physical activity. Any other thoughts on other things we should look for in terms of illness in the season and things like running?
Well, I think you said it great that fever is definitely a good indicator. If you have a fever, you shouldn't be outside in bad weather or working out. If you have more of a head cold and the temperatures aren't too extreme, sometimes that can actually help people feel better, is to get out there and get kind of things moving a little bit. But if you're in doubt about whether you should go out to run, it's probably a better idea if you change your workout to indoors or skip a workout just so you're not making yourself worse.
Yeah, and obviously check with your doctor.
Yep,
100%.
Great stuff. Athletico does a great job. They're on Twitter at Athletico, Facebook at Athletico PT, and their website, athletico.com. Go see Karen Shanahan, physical therapist, athletic trainer, Lake in the Hills. Karen, thanks so much for joining us here on Sports Medicine Weekly.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, Dr. Nick and I go through our Ask the Doctor segment. We get questions from you. I'll tell you how to get involved. Our website is sportsmedicineweekly.com. Back with more Sports Medicine Talk after this on 670 The Score.